And so the individuals have to do something about that to buck the system. You all encountered some of that too, no doubt. The prairie, which I am a very great admirer of, a lot of people think sadly of the prairie, but I think it's one of the prettiest places in the world. I don't know why they go to seashore and look at water, which is terribly dim in comparison to a prairie, but people go to seashore and look out over the water and think what a great place. Well, that's another story. But when agriculturists tried to take this land away from the natural environment, they encountered insects in mass. They moved out of the natural environment and concentrated in what the agriculturist had done. He had gone completely counter to anything ecological, which is you cannot put a large number of one kind of organism in one place without having some trouble. And that's agriculture, however, can't thrive unless you do put a large number of plants in one place. As soon as they did that, the insects moved in on them, or those who were already there took over possession of what man planted. Well, the upshot of this is that the demand, by this time we began to get a patronizing central government, by the way, and they want to give money away to everybody, and that's the way you get elected. And so they listened to the people's complaints, which is one of the jobs of government. And one of the complaints, and it was big and loud, was the insect attacks. I'll name a few of them. Chinch bug, Hessian fly, which by the way was not a native, it was an introduced version. Grasshoppers, you wouldn't believe in numbers. And the animal people suffered from screwworm fly, which we should have a picture of that out in the hall, by the way. It shows a stack of these flies. This was made in 1923. A man sitting on a hood of an old Model T Ford, and this stack of flies was 5 or 8 feet higher than he was. It must have been a good 2 tons of flies that were caught in traps around that one area. Insects were a lot of fun in those days. Grasshoppers. If you look at Metcalf and Flint's book, by the way, are you revising that book, Bob? Somebody told me.
Finished.
Oh, you finished the revision. You certainly well deserve a clap on this because it's the best book in the English language maybe anybody language on the subject of insects in their whole total aspect. I only wish you'd put it around useful and destructive insects, but they put it the other way around for you can sell it faster. I'm not talking about Bob. He's a third hand at this business. His father and Flint, both of them famous entomologists, wrote this book, and I'm certainly glad to see he's caught up with it again. What is this, 3rd revision, Bob?
This is the 5th.
5th revision. See how far behind I am. However, before the agriculturists began to make a noise about entomology, it was a hobbyist's activity. Still is. This is run through the whole business of the hobby. And every kid that gets through the first grade has got a bug net, and he chases up and down the countryside and skins his shins and gets into the briar patches and tears up his bug net and several other things. But this is a favorite outdoor sport for young children. It still is a lot of fun. It is to me yet. The medicos, the medical profession, strangely enough, were the principal, really serious collectors at the time. And there were other professional people, but the medicos in particular were inclined to, and they had the money, and in those days had plenty of time. Nowadays, I don't know what they do with their time, but they're not in an office. I don't think they collect bugs. In fact, I don't think they know anything about bugs anymore. I've never heard of a medico that knows one bug from the other. Some entomologists are getting that way nowadays. But this agricultural need, the old dollar value, this has a lot of appeals to a lot of people. And it appealed to a lot of the youngsters of the time, and they got interested in this thing, and it finally made departments of entomology when the land-grant college system came on, about coincident with this time, by the way, all of the states had land-grant colleges, of which this is one. There's one in every state, or some states have two, depending on how glib their senator was at the time. And didn't have to be a big state either. By the way, Connecticut, I think, has two, doesn't it? And Connecticut's a very small state. So it depends on how much noise you can make in Washington. That's not new either, or old. Etymology prior to all of this time, however, was a component of natural history, a broader-based thing. The Greeks started this idea of calling everything philosophy of some sort or another, and natural philosophy and natural history, and etymology was a part of this. And fortunately, they divided biology sensibly, and still sensibly, if they keep it that way, around the taxonomic base. You can organize much more valuable knowledge over an extended period around a taxonomic base than you can around a utilitarian base. We've drifted into that utilitarian thing here and have done away with zoology as an entity, gone to the utilitarian instead. They've done this in other places. And etymology at that time was a component of zoology. When S.A. Forbes, and that name you all should become familiar with, he's one of the outstanding etymologists of all time in Illinois, and S.A. Forbes was in the zoology department. And the reason etymology got out of zoology here was because S.A. Forbes was head of the survey, and he was to retire, and he wasn't going to retire, so he took the survey somewhere else and broke up the zoology department, and etymology became an entity, and Dr. Metcalf's father was the first head of the department back in the early 1920s. And there's some very well-known names in the field. His father was extremely good at recruiting capability, and he brought them in here in goodly numbers, and they all made national and international reputations. That's what set this department up as the quality place that it is and still continues to be. I didn't mention the fruit crop people because they were actually the biggest noise, made most noise about the insect damage. And the reason for that was that they were doing what is counter to, again, an ecological principle, and that is distribution of species, multiplicity per unit area. So they made orchards. Now, orchards are not like annual crops. You got an annual crop of fruit, but you had a perennial plant to produce it on. The perennial plant was subject to the ills of this world, and they were there in concentration. And so the insects did them in. Well, you say, so what? And I go do something about the insects. Trouble is, they didn't know anything about them. Very few people knew anything about insects. The taxonomy was totally lacking. Well, not totally, but it was so far gone that it was not far gone, hadn't gone anywhere at the time. But etymology had to come online, and of course taxonomy was the #1 reason for coming online, and that meant morphology, and those are the two queens of battle that we still have. Without knowledge of taxonomy and morphology, forget the subject. You can't go anywhere. The first thing you run into is was ist. You must know what the thing is before you can do anything about managing it.